Dog goes to say goodbye to its police owner, but notices something strange and stops the doctor. The fluorescent lights of Atlanta Memorial's ICU cast harsh shadows across Sarah Collins's pale face as Max pressed his nose against the observation window. Something wasn't right. The Belgian Malinois amber eyes tracked Dr. Morrison's movements, a low growl building in his throat that Officer Mike Rodriguez couldn't ignore. "Easy, boy," Mike whispered, but Max's ears remained pinned back, his body rigid with tension. Through the glass, Sarah lay motionless, surrounded by beeping monitors and hanging IV bags. Just 12 hours ago, they'd been working their regular shift at Atlanta International, Max's keen nose leading them through the labyrinth of terminals and security checkpoints. The scent hit Max first, that sharp chemical tang that always meant trouble. Sarah had trusted his instincts, as she had for the past 5 years. They tracked the suspect to Terminal C, where a drug smuggling operation was about to go very wrong. Now, Sarah was fighting for her life, and Max couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over. Dr. Morrison adjusted something in Sarah's IV line, and Max's growl intensified. Mike tugged gently on the leash, but the K9 officer wouldn't budge. There was something familiar about the doctor's movements, something that triggered a memory from the airport terminal. But Max couldn't make his human partner understand. "I know you're worried about her," Mike said, kneeling beside Max. "We all are, but Sarah is in good hands." The words meant nothing to Max. All he knew was that the same scent from the airport, chemical, dangerous, wrong, now clung to Dr. Morrison's scrubs. And every time the doctor entered Sarah's room, her vital signs would mysteriously decline. A young resident, Dr. Emily Chen, paused at the nurse's station, her attention drawn to Max's unusual behavior. She'd worked with therapy dogs in the pediatric ward and knew that K9 officers were different, their instincts honed by years of training and experience. The way Max tracked Dr. Morrison's movements wasn't anxiety or simple separation distress. This was something else. "Has he been acting like this with all the medical staff?" she asked Mike, approaching carefully. "No, Ma'am, just started today, and only with—" Mike was cut off by the sudden wail of Sarah's heart monitor. Through the glass, they watched Dr. Morrison rush to her bedside, barking orders as her vitals plummeted. Max lunged forward, nearly pulling Mike off his feet. His bark echoed through the sterile hallway, a sound Sarah would have recognized instantly. It wasn't his alert bark for drugs or explosives. This was his warning, the same one he'd given seconds before the firefight at the airport. Dr. Chen's eyes narrowed as she watched Dr. Morrison frantically adjust Sarah's medication. "Officer Rodriguez, how long have you known Dr. Morrison?" "Since Sarah was admitted last night. Why?" "Because I've worked in this ICU for 3 years," she said slowly, "and I've never seen him before today." Max's barking reached a fever pitch as Dr. Morrison glanced through the observation window. For a split second, his eyes met Max's, and something flickered there. Recognition, fear, hatred. Then he was moving, fast and purposeful, toward the service elevator at the end of the hall. "Stop him!" Dr. Chen shouted. But Max was already in motion. 5 years of training, countless hours of pursuit and apprehension drills, all leading to this moment. The imposter had hurt his partner once. He wouldn't get a second chance. The elevator doors were closing when Max broke free from his leash. Mike's shout and Dr. Chen's gasp faded behind him as he raced down the hallway, his claws clicking against the polished floor. He had one chance to prevent what his keen senses had been warning him about all along. Sarah always said Max was more than just a police dog. He was her guardian angel. As he launched himself through the narrowing gap of the elevator doors, Max knew one thing with absolute certainty. Guardian angels didn't take coffee breaks, and they sure as hell didn't give up on their partners. The last thing Mike and Dr. Chen heard before the elevator doors slammed shut was the unmistakable sound of Max's powerful jaws meeting their target, followed by a very human scream of pain and surprise. The hunt that began at Atlanta International was about to end in an elevator at Atlanta Memorial. And this time, Max wasn't letting his quarry escape. Sarah's life depended on it. Blood dripped from the fake doctor's arm as hospital security pinned him against the elevator wall. Max hadn't let go until Mike's voice commanded, "Release." Through the opening doors, and even then, the Belgian Malinois kept his muscled body between the suspect and the exit, hackles raised, ready to strike again. "Jesus Christ," breathed one of the security guards, eyeing the torn sleeve of Dr. Morrison's scrubs. "That dog means business." Dr. Chen pushed through the gathering crowd, her face set with determination. "Check his ID, now." She'd already called the real ICU attending physician, who was currently racing back from his lunch break at the cafeteria. The man they knew as Dr. Morrison had been in Sarah's room for nearly an hour, alone with her charts and her IV line. The security guard pulled a wallet from the suspect's pocket. The ID inside read, "James Wilson. Orderly from a different hospital entirely." Max's growl deepened as Officer Rodriguez read the name aloud. "Get a tox screen on Officer Collins's blood stat," Dr. Chen ordered, already running back toward the ICU. "And lock down her room. No one goes in or out without my direct authorization." Mike kept a firm grip on Max's leash as they followed her. The K9 officer's training was warring with his instincts. He wanted to stay and guard the prisoner. But Sarah needed him more. The elevator doors closed on James Wilson's face, now twisted with a mixture of pain and something darker. He wasn't talking, but his eyes said enough. This wasn't over. Back in the ICU, Sarah's room had become a flurry of activity. The real Dr. Thomas Morrison, 30 years older than the imposter and wearing a bright bow tie, was reviewing her charts with growing concern. "These medication orders," he muttered. "They're all wrong. Look at these dosages." Max whined softly, pressing against Mike's leg. The handler knew that sound. It was the same noise Max made when he needed to indicate something but couldn't bark or scratch to show location. Dr. Chen noticed too. "What is it, boy?" she asked, kneeling beside him. "What are you trying to tell us?" Max's gaze fixed on the small refrigerator in the corner of Sarah's room, the one used to store certain medications that needed to be kept cold. Dr. Chen followed his line of sight and moved toward it slowly. "Wait," she said, stopping halfway. "Officer Rodriguez, could you have Max check this area like he would for other substances?" Mike nodded, understanding immediately. "Search Max. Find it." The command released Max from his formal heel position. He moved methodically around the refrigerator, nose working overtime, before sitting abruptly and staring at the unit's base, the universal K9 signal, target located. When maintenance removed the refrigerator's bottom panel, they found a small package taped to the compressor. Inside were several vials of clear liquid, unmarked, except for a small symbol that made Mike's blood run cold. The same tattoo they'd glimpsed on one of the drug runners at Atlanta International before all hell broke loose. "Son of a..." Mike whispered, pulling out his phone. "This goes way beyond a random attack." "They followed her here," Dr. Chen murmured, documenting everything. "They knew exactly where she'd be taken. The question was, how many more of them were there? And what exactly did Officer Collins stumble onto at that airport?" Max's ears twitched. Footsteps. A shadow passed the door's window. The night shift was just beginning, and Max never slept on watch. And scared isn't the same as broken. Max remembered the first time she'd brought him a puzzle box filled with treats. Other handlers used simple food rewards. Sarah challenged him to think. Bad guys don't play fair, she told him, watching him work out the complex locking mechanism. We need to be smarter, faster, and trust each other completely. A noise in the hallway snapped Max back to the present. His ears pricked forward, but it was just an orderly wheeling medication carts. Every member of the night staff had been triple-checked after the incident with the fake doctor, but Max wasn't taking chances. Not after what happened at the airport. His mind wandered again, this time to their first real bust together. They'd been tracking a suspect through an abandoned office building when the floor gave way. Sarah had fallen, and Max had ignored every training protocol, breaking from his position to grab her tactical vest with his teeth, holding her until backup arrived. The department had wanted to discipline her for not maintaining K9 protocols. "My dog, my rules," she'd said. "He made a judgment call. I'm alive because he thinks for himself." Thunder rolled outside the hospital windows, and Max felt his muscles tense. Storms always took him back to that night 6 months ago when everything had started to unravel. They'd been working late, Sarah reviewing cold cases while Max dozed under her desk. The file had been nothing special, a routine smuggling operation from 5 years back, but something in those papers had made Sarah's heart race. Max had smelled her fear before she'd even realized she was afraid. She'd made 3 calls that night. The first, to her supervisor, went straight to voicemail. The second, to an unlisted number that Max had memorized by the way Sarah's fingers shook while dialing. The third call never went through. That's when they'd noticed the black SUV following them home. A soft moan from the hospital bed jerked Max to attention. Sarah's fingers twitched, and for a moment, her eyelids fluttered. Max whined softly, pressing his nose against her hand. The doctors had reduced her sedation, hoping she'd wake up naturally, but warned it could take time. "She's fighting," Dr. Chen said quietly from the doorway, startling Max. He hadn't heard her approach. He was getting tired. "Just like you fought, didn't you? When everyone else had given up on you." Max watched the young doctor check Sarah's vitals. In the dim light, he could see dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't left the hospital either, working well past her shift to monitor Sarah personally. She reminded him of his partner. The same quiet determination, the same refusal to accept things at face value. "I pulled her records," Dr. Chen continued, more to herself than to Max. 5 years with the department, highest arrest record in the K9 unit. But it's the small things that stand out. The notes about rehabilitating an aggressive dog, the complaints filed against her for excessive investigation of routine cases. She looked down at Max. "You two weren't just doing your jobs, were you? You were looking for something specific, something that got her shot." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room in stark white. For a moment, Max saw another flash. Muzzle fire in a dark terminal, Sarah's body falling, the smell of gunpowder and betrayal. The same smell that had clung to the fake doctor's clothes. Sarah's fingers twitched again, and this time they curled weakly around Max's muzzle. Her breathing changed, shallow but faster, fighting to surface from the darkness that had held her for 2 days. Dr. Chen rushed to check her pupils. "Officer Collins." "Sarah, can you hear me?" Max knew that look on Sarah's face, the same determination he'd seen the day she'd refused to give up on an angry, frightened dog that everyone else had written off. She was coming back to him, and when she did, they would finish what they'd started at the airport. Because Sarah had taught him more than just commands and protocols. She taught him that some battles were worth any risk, that loyalty meant fighting even when the odds were impossible. And most importantly, she taught him that the most dangerous enemies weren't the ones who bared their teeth. They were the ones who smiled while reaching for the knife. Another round of thunder shook the windows. Somewhere in Atlanta, the people who had tried to kill his partner were realizing their plan had failed. They would be coming again, with new disguises, new tricks, new ways to silence what Sarah had discovered. But they didn't know what Max knew. That love was stronger than fear, that trust could overcome any training, and that some partnerships went soul deep. Sarah had saved him once, giving him purpose when he'd lost all hope. Now it was his turn to save her. He was backing away, positioning himself between them and the ventilation grate in the corner. The scent hit them a moment later, bitter, chemical, wrong. "Gas!" Mike shouted. But Max was already in motion. He leaped at the nearest fire alarm, jaws clamping down on the plastic cover. The shriek of the alarm mixed with the sudden hiss from the vents. Emergency protocols kicked in instantly. Fire doors slammed shut as the ventilation system reversed, sucking the contaminated air out of the building. In the chaos of evacuation, no one noticed the dark-suited men slipping away or the unmarked vans speeding from the parking lot. Hours later, in a secure wing of Atlanta General Hospital across town, Sarah Collins finally opened her eyes. The room was different. The view unfamiliar. But Max's head, resting on her bed, was exactly where it should be. "Hey, partner," she whispered hoarsely. Max's tail thumped against the floor as Dr. Chen rushed to check her vitals. "Did we get them?" Mike stepped into her line of sight. "Not all of them, not yet. But thanks to Max, we've got enough evidence to blow this whole thing wide open. The FBI's real task force is involved now, the legitimate one, not those imposters from this morning." Sarah's hand found Max's ear, scratching that special spot that made his eyes close in contentment. "Good boy," she murmured. "I knew you'd figure it out." But Max kept one ear perked, one eye open. The game wasn't over. The people behind this had connections everywhere, resources they hadn't even discovered yet, and Sarah was still their loose end. Outside the new hospital room, Detective Martinez coordinated with genuine federal agents, their radios crackling with updates. The news was breaking across every channel: a massive pharmaceutical smuggling ring, corrupted military contractors, compromised airport security. Yet, as the sun set on another Atlanta evening, Max knew the real battle was just beginning. Because somewhere in the city, a phone was ringing in a very exclusive office. And on the other end of that line, someone was very, very angry that Sarah Collins was still alive. They had tried to silence her with bullets. They had tried to silence her with poison. They had failed. Max settled into his guard position, watching the new room's single door. Let them try again. This time, he'd be ready. The emergency generators of Atlanta General hummed to life as the city grid went dark. One by one, entire blocks disappeared into the night, the blackouts spreading like spilled ink across the skyline. Max's ears pricked up at the distant sound of sirens. "This is no coincidence," Sarah said from her hospital bed, her voice stronger now after 3 days of recovery. She'd insisted on keeping the lights off in her room, letting their eyes adjust to the darkness. "They're making their move." Dr. Chen checked the backup systems controlling Sarah's monitors. "Security's doubled on this floor, and we've got genuine FBI agents at every—" She stopped as Max suddenly stood, nose working the air. The Belgian Malinois moved to the door, his body language setting off every alarm in Sarah's trained mind. This wasn't his alert pose for danger. This was something else. Recognition. "Max." Sarah started to sit up, but Mike gently pressed her back. "Stay down," he whispered, hand moving to his service weapon. "What is it, boy?" The answer came in a cascade of failures. First, the backup generators stuttered. Then, the electronic locks on the secure ward clicked open. Finally, the computers at the nurses' station went dark, taking the security cameras with them. "Well," a familiar voice drawled from the doorway, "isn't this cozy?" Chief Richard Harrison of Atlanta PD stepped into the dim room, his badge catching what little light remained. Behind him, two men in tactical gear secured the hallway. The man Sarah had trusted as her supervisor for 5 years looked different now. Colder, calculating. "You should have stayed unconscious, Collins," he said, closing the door. "Would have been easier that way." Max's growl was pure thunder, but he held his position, waiting for Sarah's command. She'd taught him that, patience in the face of betrayal. "How long?" Sarah asked, her hand inching toward the nurse call button. "How long have you been helping them move product through my airport?" Harrison's laugh was bitter, coffee and old regrets. "Your airport? That's always been your problem, Collins. Too proprietary about your territory, too many questions about cargo manifests that weren't your concern." "Those drugs are killing people," Sarah shot back. "Kids are dying from whatever cocktail your military friends are cooking up in those labs." "It's bigger than drugs," Harrison said, drawing his weapon. "The pharmaceuticals, they're just the packaging. What's inside?" He smiled, and it was all teeth. "Well, that's what your four-legged partner kept sniffing out, wasn't it? Something new, something that shouldn't exist yet." Max's muscles bunched, reading Sarah's subtle hand signal. Years of partnership had taught them to communicate in silence. "Biological weapons," Sarah said, the pieces finally clicking. "Hidden in legitimate medical supplies. That's why you needed airport access. Military contractors smuggling in the components piece by piece." "Give the lady a prize." Harrison raised his gun, "And now it's time for—" He never finished the sentence. Max launched himself at Harrison's gun arm just as Sarah yanked the curtains closed, plunging the room into total darkness. The chief's shot went wide, shattering the window. The chaos that followed was a symphony of snarls and shouts. Mike tackled one of the tactical officers, while Dr. Chen hit the emergency lockdown override, sealing the ward. Sarah rolled from her bed, ignoring the pain that shot through her healing wounds. In the darkness, Max was a force of nature. Sarah had trained him to fight smart, not just hard. He didn't go for the obvious attack. Instead, he caught Harrison's sleeve, dragging him off balance. The chief's head caught the edge of a medical cart with a satisfying crack. But Harrison's men were professionals. One of them managed to get Max in a chokehold, tactical armor protecting him from the dog's teeth. Sarah saw the glint of a knife. "Max! F!" she screamed. Their special command, one she'd created just for him. Inspired by his fighting ring past, Max limped for a split second, causing his attacker to loosen his grip. Then he exploded into motion, using the man's own arm as a springboard to launch himself at Harrison, who was struggling to his feet. The chief's backup weapon clattered across the floor, spinning to a stop at Sarah's feet. She didn't hesitate. "Freeze!" Her voice cracked like a whip. "Max, hold!" Max's jaws locked onto Harrison's shoulder, not breaking skin, but promising worse if he moved. The tactical team, seeing their leader pinned, froze in place. The cavalry arrived moments later, Detective Martinez leading a joint FBI-ATF task force that had been watching the hospital, waiting for exactly this play. As Harrison was cuffed and led away, he spat words at Sarah that made Max's hackles rise. "You have no idea what you've started," he sneered. "There are people above me, above all of us. They'll never let this see light." Sarah scratched Max's ears as federal agents swept the room. "Maybe," she said, watching her former boss disappear into custody, "but they've never dealt with a partner like mine." Hours later, as the city's power gradually returned, Sarah sat on her hospital bed with Max's head in her lap. Dr. Chen was treating the few scratches he'd sustained in the fight, but his eyes never left Sarah's face. "You know what this means," Martinez said from the doorway. "We'll need you both to testify. There's going to be pressure from places we can't even imagine." Sarah smiled, feeling Max's steady warmth against her side. "Let them come," she said softly. "We're ready." Because that's what Harrison had never understood. Max wasn't just a dog with good training. He was a survivor who'd learned to fight against impossible odds. And Sarah, she was the one person who'd seen past his scars to the hero underneath. Together, they were more than a K9 unit. They were a promise kept, a trust unbroken, a love that no amount of corruption could touch. And they were just getting started. The morning sun painted Atlanta's skyline in shades of hope as Sarah Collins stood before the federal grand jury. 2 weeks had passed since the hospital showdown, and the conspiracy was finally unraveling. Max sat perfectly still beside her witness chair, his presence a steady comfort as she detailed the web of corruption they'd uncovered. "It started with a scent," Sarah explained to the assembled jury. "Max detected something unusual in a routine cargo inspection, something that didn't match any known drug profiles in our database. The evidence was damning. Chief Harrison's arrest had triggered a domino effect, exposing a network that stretched from Atlanta International's cargo bays to military contractors across 3 continents. The modified pharmaceuticals weren't just designer drugs. They were prototypes for something far more sinister. They were using legitimate medical supply routes to test bioweapons, FBI Special Agent Catherine Walsh confirmed, standing beside a display of seized documentation. Officer Collins and Max didn't just stop a drug operation. They prevented a potential global catastrophe. Back at Atlanta Memorial, Dr. Chen was implementing revolutionary changes. The hospital board had unanimously approved her proposal for an enhanced K9 security program with Sarah and Max as special advisors. The days of vulnerable medical facilities were ending. "Your partner's instincts saved more than just your life," Dr. Chen told Sarah during a training session. They watched as Max demonstrated detection techniques to a new team of hospital security dogs. "He showed us that sometimes the best medical breakthrough is a wet nose and a willing heart." The investigation expanded rapidly. Detective Martinez's task force uncovered similar operations at airports across the country. One by one, the corrupt officials and compromised contractors were falling. But Sarah knew the fight wasn't over. "They'll try again," she said during a briefing with the FBI's Bioweapons Division. "Different airports, different methods, but they'll try." Max's ears perked up at her tone. He'd been officially awarded the department's Medal of Valor, but the Belgian Malinois seemed more proud of his new specialized tactical vest, designed by Dr. Chen herself with enhanced armor and built-in detection sensors. "Let them try," Agent Walsh replied, watching Max work with the newest K9 recruits. "Thanks to you two, we know what to look for now. Every airport in the country is implementing your protocols." The changes were visible everywhere. Hospital security had been revolutionized, with K9 units becoming standard at major medical facilities. Airport screening procedures were transformed, focusing on the subtle indicators Max had first detected. Sarah and her faithful partner had sparked a paradigm shift in how America protected its most vulnerable points. Late that evening, Sarah sat in her favorite spot on the hospital's rooftop garden, a peaceful retreat Dr. Chen had created for staff and patients alike. Max lay at her feet, ever vigilant but finally relaxed. The city stretched out before them, its lights twinkling like stars fallen to earth. "You know what, partner?" Sarah scratched behind Max's ears, earning a contented sigh. "Sometimes, the biggest heroes are the ones who never stop believing in what they smell." Max's tail thumped against the ground. He might not understand the commendations, the press conferences, or the policy changes his actions had inspired, but he understood what mattered. His partner was safe. Their city was safer. And there would always be more bad guys to catch. A door opened behind them, and Max's head turned sharply before relaxing. Dr. Chen appeared with coffee and, more importantly, Max's favorite training treats. "The FBI called," she said, settling beside them. "They're expanding the program nationwide. Every major hospital and airport will have a K9 unit trained in your methods." Sarah smiled, watching a plane take off from Atlanta International, its lights bright against the dark sky. "Hear that, Max? You're starting a revolution." Max just nestled closer to his partner, his eyes scanning the horizon. He didn't need to understand revolutions or legacies. He only needed to know that wherever Sarah went, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because that's what partners do. And somewhere in the city below, a cargo plane was landing, its hold filled with mysterious crates that needed inspection. Max's ears pricked up at Sarah's slight shift in posture. He knew that tone, that energy. Time to go to work. Some heroes wear capes, others wear badges. The best ones wear fur and follow their noses, straight into history.